did you kids do?
Hi, Mr. Lewis.
I can smell fear.
Where the scary things are. And this one is directed and written by B. Harrison Smith, who previously brought us Death House, the much maligned Expendables of horror. Now, that really got critically panned, but I did see a movie of him, of B. Harrison Smith, called The Special, a film which I actually quite enjoyed and I thought was quite clever in some ways. So I was curious to see what he'd come up with this movie. Now, this is an interesting movie. Let me just tell you, if there was ever a film that will want you to encourage you to practice safe sex, it's this movie, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. But this kind of movie is almost like the anti-Stranger Things. If you've ever watched movies like Stephen King's It or Monster Squad, it kind of flips that kind of type of movie on its head. And I will kind of explain why. Before I do, I want to touch on another movie that I'd watched quite recently and reviewed, that being Rob Savage, Dashcam. Now that movie it's controversial because its lead character was very right-leaning politically and was quite obnoxious, and kind of the character's views were, caused some offence with people. And it's got a lot of kind of like press because of that. But, as much as I do agree, I think the character was obnoxious in that particular movie, I appreciated the fact that he had a character who was the lead in the movie, the protagonist, who was very different from the typical kind of mould that you'll get in a lot of kind of movies. And that's very true of this film as well. Our protagonists in this movie are very different from the typical kind of movies that you'll see, movies like I've mentioned, like Stranger Things, like kind of Stephen King's It, like Monster Squad. It's a very kind of different movie in regards to how these young teenagers are portrayed, deliberately so. Now, you often hear movies kind of critiqued because the characters might have been unlikable, and a lot of the time that's not kind of the intent from the filmmakers. This occasion, this is absolutely the intent of the filmmakers here, B. Harrison Smith and his team, because these teenagers in this movie are despicable. Let me give you a brief kind of synopsis of the movie, and it will sound somewhat innocuous when I kind of tell you the plot. It focuses on a group of friends who are somewhat of outcasts, and they tend to hang out at this kind of disused theme park, like scare attraction thing, which is not currently being used because it's not in season. And they're kind of trespassing and then kind of hanging out there overnight. But one night they discover there's actually a creature that kind of looks a little bit like Tarman from Return of the Living Dead series that is living out in this kind of this theme park for some reason. And they kind of capture it and then decide to do a number of different tasks that involve this kind of creature. That's kind of it. So far it sounds, fairly kind of standard, you might say. But the difference here is it's the intent of our protagonist which is different, because the movie deliberately tries to hold a mirror up and say, this is what the kids are becoming like today. Now, when I first watched this movie, if you kind of go on to what I think works in this film, is I was kind of watching and I was thinking it's making some metaphors about kind of society today. And I thought it was, at least some of the time when certainly when the movie was first starting, about, kind of working sort of certain messages in. For example, they're doing a class project about how kind of like urban legends start. It's kind of like a metaphor for fake news, basically, because they're kind of saying, people basically believe what they kind of read online. So they're doing this class project about kind of urban legends, and it's basically saying people just believe whatever they see online, and it's kind of going into things like the Momo kind of internet kind of fad that happened and how people kind of believed it and things like this. But there's lots of kind of things like that in this movie. That it has these kind of like little kind of analogies and kind of like metaphors about kind of realistic things that are happening in our world that our characters are kind of having a version of, so to speak. A lot of it is, for example, how people are driven by the desire to kind of be popular on kind of social media and things like this. So the movie shows us some ugly truths about the youth of today. I mean, arguably you could say it's a little bit too cynical and goes too far in cases, but it's certainly very different from your standard kind of group of teenage protagonists like you see in things like Stranger Things, like the kind of the Goonies, you know, like Stephen King's It. These kids are, for the most part, completely horrible, deplorable people, deliberately so, you know. So again, I will give, just like the Dashcam movie, I have to give some kind of originality points, I suppose, for having characters like this that you typically won't see as protagonists in a film. And the movie does try to have a couple of characters that are actually a little bit more kind of sympathetic in this kind of group of cast of characters, and I think it does achieve that eventually. But yeah, these kind of kids are just horrible people, and I won't tell you exactly all the things that they do. Suffice to say, it is a lot. They do a lot of kind of horrible things, from, you know, just to torture, to just kind of just being mean to the people in their class, things like this. So there's a whole kind of plethora of kind of bad behaviour that you'll see, and it makes commentary on things like parenting and, you know, absent parents who don't seem to kind of be aware what kind of kids are doing, and kind of the blaming other things and things like that. The movie has so many kind of like little kind of like digs at society and kind of messaging. I'm sure a lot of it won't kind of really get register with a lot of people, but there's a lot there, and I kind of think it was a mixed bag in how a lot of this was communicated, but I do think some of it was communicated relatively kind of well. Sometimes a little bit more subtle, kind of being worked into a kind of a more of a plot point. Other times it was a bit more overt. But again, I appreciate the kind of the attempt to have a somewhat of original movie. Getting away from that, in regards to things like special effects, I think the actual special effects are reasonably done quite well here. The actual kind of creature itself, again, looks a little bit like Tarman, as I say. And the makeup was quite interesting. We see some kind of wounds that are inflicted on people as well. I thought it was done to a kind of a good kind of standard here. I quite like things like the kind of the music. I think works quite well. The kind of the set design. I assume it must be filmed in kind of an actual kind of scare attraction, because there's a lot kind of going on there. But it does make for a kind of a you know, quite a good little set there. Although there are instances where I think, why is the power on immediately, things like that in certain sequences if it's kind of out of season and kind of stuff like that. The acting is a kind of a little bit of a mixed bag, which we'll come on to again. I think, for example, our teacher was very good, a very kind of convincing. There's a couple of kids I think fared better than others. So, you know, it's kind of like an interesting movie. It's not a lot of plot, to be honest, but I think the main thing here, it's meant to be a character study more than anything else, trapped in this kind of veneer of a kind of a creature feature. Maybe let's talk about what doesn't work just for a second. So I think the movie is more concerned about having these kind of messages and, you know, subverting your expectations about maybe a lot of things you've seen before. And as such, I think it drops the ball a little bit on kind of like the more kind of traditional style kind of story here. For example, this creature, when we kind of first see it, we have no idea where this creature is from or what it's doing. I mean, I don't think that in itself is a problem. But one of the things I thought was kind of, it just didn't work for me was when these kids first see the creatures, it collapses for some reason. We don't know why, it's never explained. And our kids seem completely kind of like nonplussed by it. They don't freak out at all. They see an actual kind of like monster coming towards them, and then all they do is just stand there and kind of not react to it. Now, maybe it's trying to say kids are so desensitized these days, they are literally non-reactive when they see a real life kind of monster. But I'm thinking, come on, you know, there's things here that I think are just a little bit too silly at times. And I think it's a little bit inconsistent about how they kind of treat the creature as well, because sometimes it seems to be wanting to kind of tear anyone's head off when they come near it. Other times they seem to get pretty close to it and kind of like actually touch it and things like this, and it doesn't seem to react. And I don't think the work was done there to establish why that is. And talking about the work not being done, I think our characters themselves are again a mixed bag. There's certain characters that I feel you get a better sense of who they are, but there's some, including this guy with like this big hair, who's like, there's literally no characterization at all. You know, I think he's literally just like some guy. He has no kind of real character himself. And again, I think he's kind of, it needed to have a little bit more establishing about this kind of group, how they've kind of maybe got together, why this kind of group of like teenagers hanging around with this 10-year-old. Of course, the issue with having deliberately unlikable characters is it's hard to root for them, and obviously that becomes a problem when they are your protagonists. Add to this, I think they are poorly developed characters on a kind of a writing level, and also the acting isn't brilliant from some of the kind of our younger cast either. So it is hard to really connect with these people in any type of way. And I think the movie, I don't know, it's maybe a little bit too cynical. When they're so deplorable, these kind of kids, you're thinking, wouldn't there be at least some kind of like instances where they'll be going, no, we shouldn't do that. I mean, like I said, there is an attempt to have sympathy from at least one of the characters, but I don't know. I just think it maybe went pushed it a little bit too kind of far. And I get that it kind of wants to have this kind of message, but I don't know if like you know, all the characters they just kind of went along with it, and they didn't really have any type of individual kind of personalities, if you ask me. In regards to kind of plot itself, I don't know if there was enough there. It's like I said, it's an interesting setup. This movie has this kind of very original setup with this kind of group of horrible kids. But I don't know if it really had as much kind of plot as you really wanted, because you feel once the status quo is established, where does the movie go from there in regards to kind of a narrative sense? And I felt like it kind of stumbled, because I didn't really feel there was much in the way of sort of forward momentum until like, I guess the last kind of like 20 minutes. So the second act, I felt it's just very stagnant, because I don't feel we got much in the way of kind of character growth. I don't think we got much in the way of kind of like story progression. You know, and there's things here that I think desperately needed to be fleshed out more. The characters themselves are kind of a group of kids. The circumstances of the creature itself, you know, were lacking, but we felt like this really kind of was treading water at the same time. So it's a difficult movie to kind of critique, because I think, you know, on the surface it's like a bunch of kids that find a monster, if you just want to watch it like that. But obviously you look deeper, it's kind of a look at how kids now are desensitized, and they're kind of just running amok. You know, parents are kind of not present, they're just kind of so influenced by social media and kind of things like this, and they ultimately have no kind of conscience. But it doesn't have much more than that, I didn't think, to be honest. But I gotta give it props for kind of having a very kind of different kind of setup and a very different type of characters here compared to a lot of the kind of its contemporaries. And I gotta say, it was an interesting movie for that reason. You know, along with some reasonable effects and kind of like set design, which I thought was very good. Music was good. Technically speaking, I think the camera and work and all that kind of stuff was good. But yeah, lacking in some, I think, character development and motivations and plot, really. So I will give this a 5 out of 10. I think it's an interesting watch. I don't think it's a movie that people are going, oh yeah, I really loved that, I really enjoyed that movie, because it's so cynical. But it's an interesting movie that I think will at least make you think about it. And I think in that respect, the film triumphs in some way. So I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. Kind of an average movie, but I warn you, it's not going to be for everyone, because, like I say, this ain't kind of like your your happy, you know, tight-knit gang of friends that you can kind of get behind. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.